I remember the smell that hit me when the Thunderhawk's assault ramp dropped, a wall of decay so thick it felt solid, like pushing through a curtain made of death itself. 43 hours the bodies had been lying there, scattered across the killing fields of Vantor Prime's eastern continent, and in that time the local star had baked them under its merciless glare, while the planet's acidic atmosphere went to work on exposed flesh. Brother Apothecary Hadrius Venn, they called me. Trained for 15 years in the sacred arts of gene seed recovery, indoctrinated in the chapter's most holy duty, prepared for every scenario the apothecarian's ancient texts could imagine. But nothing, not the simulations, not the mentorship under Apothecary Castor, not even my 3 years of active service had prepared me for what happens when you're sent to harvest the future of your chapter from 2,000 dead brothers whose corpses are rotting in hostile territory. The heat shimmer rising from the scorched earth made the battlefield look like it was breathing. Somewhere in that ocean of ceremity and flesh lay 600 recoverable gene seeds, according to the preliminary auger scans. 1,400 more were simply gone, vaporized by plasma, consumed by Xenos bioforms, or too damaged by the elements and combat to remain viable. My hands, already reaching for the narthecium mounted on my vambrace, started to shake. I clenched them into fists inside my gauntlets. 17 other apothecaries deployed with me that day, spreading across a front that stretched 20 kilometers. We had been given 72 hours to complete the harvest before the Tyrannid Splinter Fleet's secondary wave arrived. 72 hours to desecrate the bodies of heroes, to cut into our brothers' corpses and rip out the precious genetic legacy that would birth the next generation of the chapter. The Ultramarines taught us that an apothecary's duty transcends all other considerations. The gene seed is sacred, they said. Its recovery is not desecration but preservation, not violation but honor. I believed that once, back when I was selected from the scout company at age 24, when Senior Apothecary Castor placed the narthecium in my hands for the first time and told me I would become the guardian of our chapter's future. I believed it through every training extraction, every simulated battlefield recovery, every lecture on the 17 steps of proper progenoid removal. I believed it right up until the moment I stood on that corpse field and understood with terrible clarity that belief and reality are separated by a chasm no amount of doctrine can bridge. If you've ever faced a duty that demanded you violate everything you thought sacred, leave the word "witnessed" in the comments below and subscribe to follow this journey into the heart of an apothecary's burden. My name is Hadrius Venn, and before the Ultramarines found me, I was nobody. Hive Secundus on Macraga's eastern continent, bottom levels where the air tasted of chemical runoff, and 10,000 bodies pressed together in manufactured darkness. My mother worked the textile manufacturing for 40 years, her fingers permanently stained blue from the dyes they used to color the ceremonial banners that decorated the upper spires. She used to tell me stories about the Space Marines when I was young, how they were angels of the Emperor, how they protected humanity from horrors I couldn't imagine. I believed her because I had no reason not to, because in the grinding poverty of the Underhive, you needed something to believe in, or you'd put a rivet gun to your head before your 20th birthday. I was 15 when the testing servitors came through our sector. They appeared without warning, flanked by chapter serfs in crisp blue uniforms, moving through the crowds with Auspex scanners and gene sampling equipment. 1 in 10,000, they said. That's the ratio of acceptable aspirants to general population. I lined up with 3,000 other boys my age, stripped to the waist in a processing chamber that smelled of disinfectant and cold hope. The servitor's needle punched into my arm, drawing blood that would be analyzed for genetic markers I didn't understand. 3 weeks later, they came back for me. My mother cried when they told her. Not tears of sadness, tears of pride, of relief, of terrible gratitude that her son would escape the Underhive and become something greater. I remember her face perfectly from that day. Every line carved by years of labor, every silver strand in her black hair, the way her hands shook when she embraced me one final time. She told me she loved me. She told me to serve the Emperor with honor. She told me she would pray for me every day until her death. I never saw her again. The chapter doesn't encourage attachments to the life before, and by the time I earned the right to request compassionate leave, 14 years had passed and she'd been dead for 6. They told me she collapsed at her station, heart failure, 61 years old. They rendered her body into corpse starch to feed the manufacturing workers on the next shift. This is the Imperium's efficiency. The transformation from hive scum to scout took 3 years. They broke my body down and rebuilt it stronger. Gene seed implantation, hypnotherapy, chemical conditioning, surgical augmentation. I remember the pain of the secondary heart taking root in my chest. Remember the fever that burned through me for 2 weeks as my body tried to reject the implants. Remember waking up screaming from nightmares when my bones were breaking and reforming beneath my skin. They told us only 60% of aspirants survived the process. I watched boys I'd trained with die on surgical tables. Watched others reject the gene seed and transform into something neither human nor space marine, shambling horrors that were quietly euthanized and never spoken of again. But I survived. I endured. I became neophyte then of the Ultramarines, 4th Company, Scout Squad Titus. For 6 years I served in the Scout Company, learning the arts of reconnaissance and infiltration, earning my first kill at age 17 on a world I can't name against an enemy I was forbidden to discuss. I was good at it, quick, precise, adaptable, but I wasn't exceptional. There were better scouts, aspirants who would go on to receive the full implantation and become battle brothers in power armor. I accepted this. Not every warrior can be a hero. The chapter needs support roles, auxiliary forces, specialists who serve vital functions outside the glory of frontline combat. That's when Apothecary Castor noticed me. He'd been observing the Scout Company during a training exercise. We were practicing emergency extractions under simulated artillery fire, and I'd managed to drag 2 wounded brothers to safety despite taking a training round to my left, shoulder that had cracked the bone. Afterward, he called me to his sanctum in the Apothecarian. The room smelled of counterseptic and sacred oils, walls lined with specimen jars containing preserved organs and gene seeds suspended in amber fluid. He asked me why I'd risked myself for the wounded. I told him the truth. Because they were my brothers, and abandoning them would have meant abandoning my duty. He nodded, like I'd answered correctly on a test I hadn't known I was taking. The chapter always needs apothecaries, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. He was old, even by Space Marine standards. 417 years of service, his face a topographical map of scars and augmentics. The work is not glorious. There are no battle honors for the man who harvests gene seed from the dead. No songs sung about the apothecary who saves 1 life while 1,000 brothers win victory. But without us, the chapter dies. Without us, every fallen warrior is lost forever, his genetic legacy consumed by fire or xenos or simple rot. Do you understand what I'm offering you? I understood. I accepted. I became an apothecary aspirant at age 24, beginning a 15-year journey through medical training, genetic manipulation protocols, and the sacred mysteries of progenoid gland cultivation. They taught me anatomy in such detail I could disassemble a Space Marine's body with my eyes closed. 17 additional organs beyond baseline human configuration, every one of them critical to our enhanced capabilities. They taught me the gene seed's nature, how it carries the genetic blueprint of our Primarch, how it must be harvested within specific time frames, or the biological degradation renders it unusable. They taught me the Narthesium, the apothecary's holy tool, reductor for progenoid extraction, carnifex for mercy killings, diagnoster for vital sign analysis. 15 years of training, and I thought I understood the weight of the role. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. None of us ever are. The Battle of Vantor Prime was supposed to be a simple compliance action. Imperial intelligence had identified a Tyranid scouting fleet approaching the system. Small biomass, manageable threat level, Perfect opportunity for the 4th Company to intercept before the Xenos could establish a foothold. Chapter Master Calgar himself authorized the deployment. 200 battle brothers, full tactical and devastator support, backed by armor and aerial assault elements. The planet's native population numbered 16 million, spread across 3 continents and 17 major hive clusters. Lose Vantor Prime, and the Tyranids would use its biomass to fuel their advance into the Ultima Segmentum. Defend it successfully, and we'd cut off their scouting tendril before it could report back to the greater hive fleet. We deployed with absolute confidence. The Ultramarines do not know defeat. Our tactics are perfect, our training unmatched, our gene lineage descended directly from the Lord of Macragge himself. 18 apothecaries accompanied the strike force, standard protocol for extended operations. My role was support to 4th Company's 3rd Tactical Squad, Brother Sergeant Marius commanding. Good men, veteran warriors with an average of 70 years combat experience. I'd served with them for 3 years, harvested gene seed from 4 brothers they'd lost in that time. They trusted me to do my duty when the moment came. The Tyranids hit us with a force 10 times larger than intelligence had predicted. The first wave made planetfall on Vantor's eastern continent at dawn on the 3rd day of our deployment. Augur scans had shown a small splinter fleet. 3 bioships, estimated ground forces of 20,000 organisms. What actually emerged from the mycetic spores was closer to 200,000. Hormigons and termagants in numberless swarms, carnifexes and tyrannofexes providing heavy assault, lictors and genstealers flanking through the canyons. And behind them, directing the swarm with horrifying intelligence, 3 hive tyrants whose psychic presence pressed against our minds like a physical weight. The 4th Company took up defensive positions along the ridgeline overlooking the eastern approach to Hive Primus. Standard Codex tactics: establish kill zones, create overlapping fields of fire, funnel the enemy into predetermined engagement areas. For the first 3 hours, it worked perfectly. Bolt of fire hammered into the advancing swarms, turning the valley floor into a carpet of chitinous bodies and bioacid. Devastator squads rained plasma and missiles onto the larger organisms. Assault elements countercharged when the Xenos breached our firing lines. Chainswords carving through chitin and flesh. We were winning. Then the Bio-Titans arrived. I'd never seen a Hierophant before. The picked captures and tactical briefings don't prepare you for the reality, a walking mountain of living weaponry. 40 meters tall, biocannons capable of melting through ceramic like wax. 2 of them emerged from the mycetic spore clusters, and suddenly our defensive position became a killing ground with us as the targets. The first Titan's acid spray dissolved 3rd Squad's left flank, 3 brothers reduced to screaming organic soup inside their armor. The second opened fire with its bioplasma, superheated gouts of energy that turned the ridgeline into glass. Brother Captain Ventress ordered the retreat. Not a rout. We're Ultramarines, we don't flee. A tactical withdrawal to secondary positions. But the Tyranids had anticipated this. Genestealer broods hit our flanks as we pulled back, moving with horrifying speed through terrain that should have been impassable. Lictors materialized from camouflage, their scything talons punching through power armor like it was parchment. I saw Brother Titus, who'd trained me in my scout days, get dragged down by a lictor, watched its talons punch through his helmet, and emerge from the back of his skull trailing brain matter and bone fragments. His gene seed was still viable. I extracted it while the battle raged around me, my Narthesium's reductor drilling through the shattered ceramite and cutting into his chest to reach the progenoids. The extraction takes 17 seconds if you do it perfectly. I did it in 14. Brother Titus's gene seed went into my Narthesium stasis chamber, joining the 3 others I'd already harvested that day. His body I left where it fell, because there was no time for anything else. Because 30 meters away, another brother was screaming for help, and the swarm was closing in, and I had to choose between honoring the dead and saving the living. I chose the living. I will regret that choice until the day I die. If the weight of impossible choices already burdens your heart, press like so, others may witness what true duty costs in the 41st millennium. The battle lasted for 7 hours before the order came to evacuate. 7 hours of grinding, desperate combat as 200 space marines tried to hold back a Tyranid swarm that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. We lost ground meter by meter, position by position, each retreat paid for in blood and ceramite. The company's VoxNet filled with final transmissions, brothers reporting catastrophic damage, ammunition exhausted, positions overrun. I moved between the squads like a ghost, harvesting gene seed from the fallen, administering combat stimulants to the wounded, using my carnifex to grant the Emperor's peace to those too damaged to save. Brother Apothecary Matthias died at hour 4, dragged into a mob of hormagaunts that tore him apart before I could reach him. His Narthesium stasis chambers contained 37 gene seeds. They were lost with him. Brother Apothecary Dante took a bioplasma hit at hour 5, the superheated energy cooking him alive inside his armor. I reached him in time to hear him screaming, watched him thrash as his augmented biology kept him conscious through agony that should have killed him instantly. I used the carnifex. It was mercy. His Narthesium held 21 gene seeds. I managed to recover his equipment before the position was overrun, adding his harvest to my own. By hour 6, the 4th Company had been reduced to 87 combat-effective brothers. We'd killed thousands of Tyranids, tens of thousands maybe, but they kept coming like a living tide that cared nothing for casualties. The Hierophants had pushed to within a kilometer of our final defensive position, and the psychic pressure from the hive tyrants was causing seizures in some of the brothers. Brother Captain Ventress made the call. Full evacuation to orbit, immediate extraction. The Thunderhawk screamed down through the planet's atmosphere, loading wounded and what remained of our fighting strength. I was on the last transport off the surface. My Narthesium stasis chambers held 63 gene seeds, my own harvests plus those recovered from fallen apothecaries. 63 genetic legacies preserved out of 113 brothers confirmed dead on the battlefield. The math was simple and devastating. 50 gene seeds lost. 50 future ultramarines who would never be born. 50 threads of Robout Gilliman's genetic legacy consumed by Xenos, or burned to ash, or left to rot in Vantor's acid rain. In orbit, the chapter fleet regrouped. The 4th Company had been gutted. 113 dead, 47 wounded. Only 40 brothers, still combat effective. The Tyranid biomass had achieved planetary infestation, the splinter fleet now feeding on Vantor's population of 16 million souls. High Command made the strategic calculation. The planet was lost, but its loss could still serve the Imperium. A detailed plan formed: wait 72 hours for the initial feeding frenzy to subside, then deploy recovery teams to the battlefield. The Tyranids would have moved on to the hive cities by then, leaving the eastern continent's killing fields relatively clear. We would harvest every recoverable gene seed from our fallen brothers. The mission briefing took place in the strike cruiser's stratagem. 17 surviving apothecaries gathered before Brother Captain Ventress. He looked like he'd aged a century in those 7 hours, his armor scorched black, one side of his face replaced by bloody augmentics, where a Tyranid talon had carved through helmet and bone. He spoke in a voice that carried no emotion, because emotion would have broken him. "Brothers," he said, "you are assigned to recover gene seed from the fallen. Intelligence estimates 600 viable progenoids remain on the eastern continent battlefield. You will extract them all. This is not a combat operation. You are harvesters, not warriors. Speed and efficiency are your priorities. The Tyranid secondary wave will make planetfall in 72 hours. You deploy in 43. The Emperor protects. Robout Gilliman watches. Do your duty." 43 hours. The bodies would be 43 hours dead when we returned. In Vantor's climate, acidic atmosphere, temperature extremes, native bacterial fauna, that meant advanced decomposition. It meant bloating and liquefaction. It meant cutting through rot to reach the progenoid glands. meant working in conditions that would test every limit of our training and conditioning. It meant desecrating corpses that had once been brothers, heroes, warriors worthy of remembrance and honor. I returned to my quarters and tried to pray. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat in silence and thought about my mother. Tried to remember her face the way it had been before the years of labor aged her beyond her time. The memory was fading, eroded by decades of hypnotic conditioning and biological augmentation that rewrote my brain structure. I wondered if she would have been proud of what I'd become. I wondered if she'd have been horrified. I wondered if there was a difference. 43 hours later, the Thunderhawk's assault ramp dropped, and I stepped into hell. The smell was worse than anything I'd experienced. Human decay has a certain character to it. The breakdown of adipose tissue, the chemical signatures of cellular death, the compound gases released by bacterial action. I'd smelled it before, had trained to tolerate it through controlled exposure and mental conditioning. But this was different. This was space marine biology breaking down. Supercharged metabolisms that accelerated the decomposition process. Enhanced organ systems that released exotic biochemicals as they failed. Ceramite armor that had trapped the bodies inside sealed caskets and cooked them in their own fluids. The battlefield stretched before me in all directions, a landscape of the dead. They lay where they'd fallen, scattered across 20 kilometers of scorched earth and broken rock. Some were intact, killed by single catastrophic wounds, decapitation, torso penetration, traumatic brain destruction. Others had been torn apart by the swarm, body parts scattered across meters of ground, armor shredded to reveal the meat inside. The Vantor star beat down on them all, baking flesh and ceramite alike, while the acidic atmosphere went to work on exposed tissue. I activated my armor's atmospheric seal and cranked the air recyclers to maximum filtration. It helped marginally. My Auspex painted the battlefield in thermal signatures and biological markers, identifying bodies that still contained viable gene seed. The Narthecium on my vambrace hummed to life, its machine spirit, or the mechanism my training insisted I interpret as a machine spirit, cycling through diagnostic routines. 600 recoverable gene seeds, intelligence had said. 600 brothers who could still contribute to the chapter's future despite their deaths. 1,400 who couldn't. The first body I found was Brother Sergeant Marius. I recognized his armor's heraldry before I recognized anything else. The squad markings on his right pauldron, the personal honor badges earned over 90 years of service. He was lying face down in a crater, his left side completely gone from hip to shoulder, the wound cauterized by bioplasma heat. The smell coming off him was indescribable. I knelt beside the corpse and tried to tell myself this was Brother Sergeant Marius anymore. This was organic matter in a specific configuration. This was a delivery system for genetic material. This was a logistical challenge, not a desecration. I didn't believe it. But I did it anyway. The Narthecium's reductor is designed for efficiency. 2-centimeter cutting head, monomolecular edge, capable of penetrating ceramite and bone with equal ease. You place it against the progenoid gland's location, one in the neck, one in the chest, and activate the extraction mechanism. The reductor drills through armor and flesh, cuts around the gland, and retrieves it intact. The whole process takes 17 seconds per gland if the body is fresh and undamaged. Brother Sergeant Marius's body was neither fresh nor undamaged. The neck gland was accessible, but 43 hours of decomposition had begun breaking down the surrounding tissue. I had to cut through half-liquefied muscle and bloated flesh to reach it, the reductor's mechanism clogging twice with decayed matter before I successfully extracted the gland. It emerged looking like a deflated balloon filled with gray custard, the genetic material inside still viable according to my diagnoster, but degraded by 15%. The chest gland was worse. Marius's chest cavity had been breached by the plasma hit, exposing internal organs to the atmosphere. I had to reach inside his body, push aside ruptured organs and coagulated blood, and cut the progenoid free from surrounding tissue that had begun to putrefy. 17 seconds in ideal conditions. It took me 4 minutes and 32 seconds to extract both glands from Brother Sergeant Marius. I placed them in my Narthesium stasis chambers and moved to the next body, Brother Demetrian. 3 years older than me, veteran of 17 campaigns, awarded the Iron Skull for valor on Cronus, dead from Genstealer claws that had punched through his helmet and scrambled his brain. His face was unrecognizable, swollen to twice normal size, features distorted by internal pressure and bacterial action. I extracted his gene seed and moved on. Brother Constantine, Brother Hadrian, Brother Julius, Brother Marcus. Names I'd known, warriors I'd served beside, brothers I'd shared training exercises and combat deployments with, all reduced to harvest targets, sources of genetic material, logistical problems to be solved with mechanical efficiency. I harvested gene seed for 6 hours straight, moving between corpses, drilling through armor and flesh, trying not to think about what I was doing. The other apothecaries worked their assigned sectors, spread across the battlefield in a perimeter that slowly contracted as we completed our grim work. The VoxNet was silent except for periodic check-ins and coordinates for exceptional difficulties. Nobody wanted to talk about what we were doing. Words would have made it real in a way that action somehow didn't. At hour 7, I found Brother Cornelius. He'd been in my scout squad, one of the few who'd made it to full battle brother status. We'd trained together for 6 years, fought together for 3 more before I transferred to the Apothecarian. His body had been torn in half by a carnifex, the 2 sections separated by 20 meters. The upper half still wore his helmet, the faceplate's optics staring at nothing. I approached the torso, activated my Narthesium, and prepared to extract the neck progenoid. Something moved inside the helmet. My hand froze. Reductor poised above the corpse. The movement came again, something writhing behind the faceplate, pressing against the optics. With careful precision, I released the helmet's seals and removed it. Maggots, thousands of them, fat and white, filling the helmet's interior and feeding on what remained of Cornelius's face. They'd entered through the neck stump where the body had been severed, colonizing the head and beginning the process of reducing tissue to simple proteins. As I lifted the helmet away, they spilled out in a disgusting cascade, tumbling onto the scorched earth and writhing in the sudden light. I vomited inside my helmet. The armor's internal recyclers caught most of it, processing the expelled matter through filters and returning neutralized fluid to my system. But for 30 seconds I stood there shaking, tasting bile and acid, staring at the maggot-infested ruin that had once been my friend's head. Then I activated the reductor and extracted the gene seed. Because that's the duty. Because abandoning the harvest would mean Cornelius died for nothing. Because 600 recoverable gene seeds meant 600 future brothers who would carry forward our chapter's legacy, and personal disgust was irrelevant measured against that arithmetic. I moved to the next body, and the next, and the next. This cycle has persisted for 10 millennia. If you think anyone should remember what it truly costs, subscribe so their names aren't lost to silence. The sun set over Vantor Prime's eastern continent, and we kept working. Our armor's optics switched to low-light mode, painting the battlefield in thermal signatures and false color enhancement. The bodies glowed on my auspex, cooling corpses slowly equilibrating with the ambient temperature. In the darkness, it was almost possible to pretend they weren't brothers, weren't warriors who died following orders I'd helped plan. Almost possible to see them as simple biological resources, harvestable material no different from any other logistical supply. Almost. At hour 12, Brother Apothecary Origin's voice crackled across the VoxNet. Hadria's coordinates 372/819. I need assistance. I adjusted my route and headed toward his position. I found him kneeling beside Brother Captain Ventress's second-in-command, Brother Lieutenant Gallus. The body was in bad shape. A Hierophant's acid spray had hit him directly, dissolving his armor's left side in the flesh beneath. The wound had cauterized almost immediately, sealing the damage and preventing immediate death, but Gallus had bled out internally over the course of several minutes. 43 hours later, his body had swollen with putrefaction, internal gases building up until the remaining armor plates had buckled outward. "The chest progenoid," Origin said, his voice tight with control. "The acid damage compromised the gland's structural integrity. It's ruptured. I need you to confirm my assessment before I mark it as non-viable." I activated my diagnoster and scanned the body's internal structure. Origin was right. The progenoid had been partially melted by the acid spray, its cellular matrix breaking down, but not completely. Maybe 60% of the genetic material was still intact, still theoretically usable. Suboptimal, but not worthless. The apothecarian's cultivation chambers might be able to salvage enough to create a viable implant. "Harvest it," I said. "Mark it as degraded, but recoverable. Let the gene savants make the final determination." Origin nodded and set to work. I watched him cut through flesh that had gone soft with rot, his reductor sawing through tissue that had lost structural integrity. The progenoid came out in pieces, fragments of glandular material that Origin carefully collected in a stasis container. When he finished, his gauntlets were covered in gray slime streaked with yellow. He looked at them for a long moment, then wiped them on Gallus's ruined armor. 63 extractions so far," he said. "How many have you completed?" 87. I gestured at the battlefield stretching into darkness. 300 viable bodies still remain in my sector. How many are you finding? Maybe 1 in 3 has recoverable gene seed. The rest are too damaged, too degraded, or the Tyranids consumed the progenoids. He paused. "We're going to lose more than 1,400 Hadrias." Intelligence's estimates were optimistic. I'd already reached the same conclusion. The math was simple. 18 apothecaries working at maximum efficiency could theoretically harvest 600 gene seeds in 72 hours. But theory assumed optimal conditions. Fresh corpses, minimal battle damage, no environmental complications. We had none of those advantages. We had rotting bodies in advanced stages of decomposition, massive trauma that had destroyed or compromised progenoid clans, and an atmospheric composition that accelerated tissue breakdown. If we harvested 400 gene seeds from this graveyard, we'd be lucky. 1,600 lost. 1,600 future ultramarines who would never exist. 1,600 threads of Gilliman's legacy, severed by Xenos and time and simple biological decay. "We keep working," I said, because there was nothing else to say. "Every gene seed we recover is a brother who didn't die in vain." Origin nodded, stood, and moved toward the next thermal signature on his Auspex. I did the same, stepping over scattered armor fragments and desiccated alien corpses toward the next harvest target. Brother Tiberius, dead 43 hours, killed by a lictor's scything talon that had punched through his back and erupted from his chest, severing his spine and pulping his lungs. The wound had killed him in seconds, but not before the talon's neurotoxins paralyzed his body's autonomous functions, and his augmented biology kept him conscious long enough to feel everything. I knew this because his armor's medical data logger had recorded his final moments, heart rate spiking to 200 beats per minute, adrenaline levels reaching toxic concentrations, pain receptors firing at maximum capacity for 17 seconds before his brain finally shut down. I extracted his gene seed, both progenoids intact, minimally degraded. Into the stasis chamber, cataloged the harvest, moved to the next body. Brother Silvanus, Brother Mordecai, Brother Augustine, Brother Dante. The names blurred together, becoming a litany of the dead, a chant I repeated to myself as I worked through the night. This is necessary. This is duty. This is the only way we preserve the chapter. This is what it means to serve as an apothecary. The words felt hollow. The work felt like grave robbery. At hour 18, I ran out of room in my Narthesium's primary stasis chambers. Standard load capacity is 120 gene seeds, stored in individual suspension fields that prevent cellular degradation. I'd filled every available chamber, each one now containing the genetic future of a brother who'd given everything in service to the Imperium. I voxed for retrieval, and a Thunderhawk made a quick insertion to collect the harvest and deliver fresh stasis containers. The exchange took 7 minutes. Then I returned to work. Brother Lysander, Brother Gaius, Brother Octavian, Brother Severus. The reductor drilled. The gene seeds emerged. The stasis chambers filled. I became a machine executing a program, an automated system processing organic matter through predetermined steps. Thought was the enemy. Reflection would break me. I narrowed my consciousness to the immediate task: locate body, assess viability, extract progenoids, move to next target. Everything else faded into background noise. Until I found Brother Apothecary Castor. He was lying in a depression between two ridges, hidden from aerial observation by the terrain's topology. My Auspex had marked his position but classified it as low priority due to the thermal signature indicating extensive tissue damage. When I reached him, I understood why the system had deprioritized the recovery. The Tyranids had fed on him, not killed and moved on. Fed actively, systematically, reducing his body to component proteins. His legs were gone below the knees, consumed down to bone. His left arm had been stripped of flesh, leaving only the skeletal structure and the armor that encased it. His torso had been opened, ribs cracked and spread, internal organs partially devoured. And his face. They'd eaten his face, but his gene seed remained intact. Both progenoids nestled in tissue that the Tyranids had somehow missed or deemed less desirable than other body parts. The diagnostor confirmed viability, 97% genetic integrity, minimal degradation, perfect for cultivation and implantation. Castor had been my mentor. He'd trained me for 15 years, taught me everything I knew about the apothecarian's sacred duty, prepared me for this exact moment. He'd been 417 years old, a living repository of chapter history and accumulated wisdom. And here he lay, partially eaten by aliens, reduced to meat and bone, waiting for me to cut into his corpse and harvest the organs that would birth the next generation. This is necessary, I told myself. This is duty. This is what he would have wanted. The reductor drilled through his sternum. The neck progenoid came out clean. The chest gland required me to reach inside his opened torso, navigate around organs the Tyranids had sampled but not consumed, and cut through tissue that 43 hours of decomposition had rendered soft and pliable. My gauntlets disappeared into his body cavity, up to the wrist. I felt around for the progenoid, located it by touch, and extracted it with careful precision. Both gene seeds went into the stasis chamber. Apothecary Castor's genetic legacy, preserved. His body I left where it lay, because there was no other option. Because 16 other apothecaries were conducting identical harvests across 20 kilometers of battlefield. Because we had 54 hours remaining before the Tyranid secondary wave arrived, and all this would be for nothing. I moved to the next body, and the next, and the next. Comment where you're watching from. Let them know someone, somewhere, still remembers what they sacrificed on Vantor Prime. Hour 30 marked the halfway point. 18 apothecaries had harvested 412 gene seeds from across the battlefield. The math was brutal and final. We were on pace to recover maybe 500 total, not the 600 intelligence had projected. Every hour the bodies decayed further. More progenoids degraded beyond viability. More genetic legacies slipped through our fingers despite our best efforts. The VoxNet carried increasing reports of complications. Brother Apothecary Thaddeus encountered a cluster of bodies that had been partially consumed by local scavengers, smaller tyrannid organisms that had remained on the battlefield to feed on the dead. He spent 3 hours fighting off rippers while trying to extract gene seed from corpses that were being actively devoured. He recovered 7 progenoids. 33 were lost. Brother Apothecary Magnus found a section of the battlefield where an ammunition dump had cooked off during the retreat, incinerating 24 brothers caught in the explosion. The heat had been sufficient to compromise their progenoids at the cellular level. The genetic material was technically intact, but heat damaged to the point of uselessness. 24 more brothers lost. Brother Apothecary Laurentius reported that acidic groundwater had seeped into a low-lying area where 17 brothers had fallen. The acid had eaten through armor seals and attacked the body's inside, liquefying tissue and destroying progenoid glands. 17 more losses. The harvest continued. We worked through the second day without pause, without rest, sustained by our enhanced biology and the knowledge that stopping meant failing our duty. The sun rose over fields of the dead, illuminating the scope of the catastrophe in harsh daylight. From my position on the ridgeline, I could see the other apothecaries moving between corpses like carrion birds. White armor streaked with the fluids of decomposition, each of us contributing to a grim tally that grew more depressing with every passing hour. I was extracting gene seed from Brother Felix, veteran of 19 campaigns, honored for valor on 3 separate worlds, dead from a carnifex's crushing claws that had pulped his torso when the Vox crackled with an alert. Contact, contact, Tyranid organisms approaching from Vector 270. Multiple signatures, moving fast. I looked up from my work, Auspex automatically scanning the indicated direction. Thermal blooms appeared on the display. 37 organisms, Hormagaunt classification, moving at high speed across the broken terrain. They'd been drawn by the scent of death, or perhaps by whatever synaptic impulses guided their hunting patterns. They were heading directly for our position. All apothecaries, fall back to Rally Point Beta. Came the command from Brother Apothecary Sergeant Matthias. Defensive formation. Protect the harvest. I finished extracting Felix's chest progenoid. No time for the neck gland. Leave it. Move. And began running toward the rally point. Around me, other apothecaries were doing the same, abandoning bodies mid-extraction, prioritizing the gene seeds already harvested over those still waiting in cooling corpses. The Hormagaunts closed the distance with terrifying speed, their chitin-covered bodies flowing over the terrain like a living wave. We formed a defensive perimeter at Rally Point Beta, 17 apothecaries with bolt pistols drawn, Narthesia stowed, ready to defend our harvest. The Hormagaunts hit us like a breaking wave, all slashing talons and bioacid spit. I fired my bolt pistol with mechanical precision, explosive rounds detonating inside alien bodies and reducing them to fragments of chitin and meat. An organism got close enough to slash at my armor, its talons screeching across ceramite and leaving deep scores. I crushed its skull with a backhand blow and kept firing. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. 37 Tyranid organisms destroyed, 0 apothecary casualties. When it was over, we stood in silence among the alien corpses, bolt pistols smoking, armor covered in Xeno's blood and human decay, staring at each other with the understanding that this was only going to get worse. "How many bodies did we abandon?" someone asked. 23 in my sector. Another voice answered. 12 with viable gene seed still in situ. The calculations spread across the Vox net as apothecaries tallied the harvest targets we'd been forced to leave. 41 bodies, 37 with recoverable progenoids. 74 more gene seeds lost because we'd had to choose between defending what we'd already harvested and completing the full extraction. We returned to work, Matthias ordered. Increased vigilance. Tyranid contacts are now expected. Harvest efficiency is paramount. We dispersed back to our assigned sectors. I returned to Brother Felix's body, intending to complete the extraction I'd abandoned. But in the 4 minutes we'd been fighting, something had found him. Rippers, small tyrannid organisms, little more than fanged mouths on legs, had swarmed over the corpse and consumed the remaining progenoid. I arrived in time to see them tearing through the tissue where the neck gland had been, reducing it to bloody fragments. I killed the rippers with my boot, crushing them one by one, knowing it was futile and pointless, and that Brother Felix's gene seed was already gone. Then I moved to the next body on my list and tried not to think about how many more we'd lose to scavengers, time, and simple biological reality. Hour 48. 36 hours since deployment. We'd harvested 531 gene seeds across all sectors. The pace was slowing as we exhausted the easy recoveries and moved to increasingly damaged or degraded corpses. Every extraction took longer, required more precision, carried higher risk of damaging the progenoid during removal. And all the while, the clock kept running toward the moment when the Tyrannid secondary wave would arrive and this entire operation would become a death sentence. I was working on Brother Maximilian, killed by genestealer claws, body so thoroughly shredded that finding intact progenoids required careful dissection of scattered tissue, when I heard it. A sound I'd been dreading since deployment. The wet, organic pulse of a Lichter's chameleonic system deactivating. I spun, bolt pistol drawn, and put 3 rounds into the creature's center mass before it could close the distance. The Lichter staggered, chitinous armor cracking, but kept coming. Space marine biology gives us reaction speeds far beyond human baseline, but Lichters are faster. Its scything talons were a blur of motion, one sweeping toward my head, the other aiming for my torso. I dropped under the head strike and took the torso hit on my shoulder pauldron. The ceramite cracked, the underlying armor plating dented, but held. The impact threw me backward 3 meters. I rolled, came up firing, and emptied my bolt pistol's magazine into the Lichter's thorax. The creature finally went down, I-core pumping from a dozen wounds, but not before its death scream echoed across the battlefield. More shapes appeared on my auspex. Lichter pack, 5 more organisms, decamouflaging in a coordinated pattern. They'd been stalking me for hours, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now they were committing to the attack, betting that one apothecary alone was easy prey. They were wrong, but not by much. I can't describe the next 10 minutes coherently. It was violence reduced to instinct and training, my body moving through combat patterns burned into muscle memory by decades of conditioning. My bolt pistol ran dry. I drew my combat knife, not a standard blade but an apothecary's special variant, designed for precision cutting but capable of killing in close quarters. The Lichters were fast and deadly, but Space Marine combat doctrine is unmatched. I used the terrain, kept them from surrounding me, targeted vulnerable points in their kit and armor. When it was over, 6 dead Lichters lay around me in various states of dismemberment. My armor was scored with talon marks, one entire pauldron sheared off, my left vambrace cracked and leaking hydraulic fluid. The Narthesian was intact, miracle or priority targeting by my subconscious, I don't know which. I checked the stasis chambers, all functioning, all gene seeds secure. I limped back toward the Thunderhawk extraction point for equipment resupply and emergency armor repairs. On the way, I passed 17 bodies I should have harvested, would have harvested if the Lichters hadn't forced me to abandon my sector. 17 more brothers whose gene seed would rot in Vantor's toxic atmosphere because I'd prioritized my own survival over completing the mission. The thought followed me all the way to the resupply point. Should I have stood my ground? Should I have kept extracting gene seed until the Lichters killed me, trusting that another apothecary would recover both my harvest and my body? Would that have been the more dutiful choice? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Hour 60. 12 hours remaining before mandatory evacuation. The harvest stood at 589 gene seeds across all apothecaries. We were running out of viable bodies. Most of what remained were corpses too damaged, too degraded, or too contaminated for successful extraction. We kept working anyway, because stopping meant accepting that 1,400 brothers had died for nothing, and that acceptance would break something fundamental in the chapter's soul. I found myself working on bodies I would have classified as non-viable during training. Brothers whose progenoids had been partially destroyed by combat trauma, but might retain enough genetic integrity for salvage. Brothers whose decomposition had progressed to the point where distinguishing glandular tissue from surrounding decay required instinct more than diagnostics. Brothers whose bodies had been so thoroughly violated by death and time that extracting their gene seed felt less like sacred duty and more like necrophilia. But I did it. We all did. Because the alternative was leaving them behind, and that was unthinkable. Brother Apothecary Thaddeus found a cache of bodies in a collapsed bunker, 23 brothers who'd made a final stand against a Carnifex assault. They'd been sealed in the bunker for 48 hours before he managed to dig through the rubble. The lack of atmospheric exposure meant minimal decomposition, and he successfully harvested 41 gene seeds from corpses that were relatively intact. It was the single greatest recovery of the operation. But for every success like Thaddeus's, there were a dozen failures. Bodies that looked intact from external assessment, but whose internal trauma had destroyed the progenoids. Brothers whose gene seed had been contaminated by tyrannid biotoxins that rendered the genetic material unusable. Corpses that had been moved by scavengers scattered across terrain that made recovery impossible within our time constraints. Hour 65. The VoxNet carried new orders. Begin final phase extraction. This meant abandoning systematic sector clearing and focusing on the highest probability targets. Bodies identified by Auspex as having intact progenoids, minimal trauma, and accessible positioning. It was battlefield triage applied to corpse recovery, a cold calculation that some brothers' gene seed was more recoverable than others. I hated the order. I followed it anyway. The final 5 hours were a blur of exhaustion and mechanical repetition. My armor's stimulant dispensers pumped combat drugs into my system to maintain operational capacity despite 48 hours of continuous labor. The drugs kept my body functional but did nothing for the psychological weight of cutting into the 207th corpse, the 319th, the 451st. Hour 70. The Tyrannid secondary wave appeared on long-range augers. Estimated time to planetfall, 2 hours. Evacuation now mandatory, no exceptions. All apothecaries received the recall order simultaneously. Final tally, 603 gene seeds recovered, 1,397 lost forever. I stood in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by bodies I hadn't reached, brothers whose gene seed would remain in their rotting corpses until tyrannid digestion pools dissolved everything into base nutrients. The sun was setting again, painting the killing fields in shades of red and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful given the context. Brother Hadrius, you are ordered to extract immediately. Acknowledge. I looked at the corpse nearest to me. Brother, someone. I didn't know his name. His armor heraldry was too damaged to identify, his face too decayed to recognize. But he'd been an ultramarine. He'd died following orders, believing his sacrifice mattered. And I was leaving him here to rot because time had run out, and duty demanded I save myself and the harvest I'd already completed. Acknowledged, I voxed back. Extracting now. The Thunderhawk insertion took 3 minutes. Loading all surviving apothecaries and their recovered gene seed took 7 more. We lifted off with tyrannid mycetic spores already visible in the atmosphere, biological drop pods carrying the secondary wave that would finish consuming Vantor Prime. From the Thunderhawk's viewport, I watched the battlefield shrink into the distance. Somewhere down there, Brother Sergeant Marius lay in a crater with his chest opened and empty. Somewhere down there, Apothecary Caster's partially eaten corpse was waiting for tyrannid digestion pools. Somewhere down there, 1,397 Space Marines would never contribute to the chapter's future, because we'd run out of time and they'd died too damaged, or too degraded, or too far from help. I delivered my harvest to the Apothecarian's gene vault. 603 stasis containers, each one carefully labeled with the fallen brother's identification, combat record, and genetic markers. The gene savants received them with ritualistic solemnity, chanting prayers to the machine god and the emperor, while they transferred the progenoids to long-term cultivation chambers. "Your duty honors the chapter," the chief gene savant told me. "These gene seeds will birth 600 future ultramarines. Their sacrifice was not in vain." I nodded because that was expected. I said nothing because words would have revealed how hollow the platitude felt. If you believe they deserved better than numbers in a tally, let your like be the acknowledgement they never received. 3 weeks later, I was assigned to standard apothecarian duties aboard the strike cruiser, training new initiates, conducting routine medical assessments, maintaining the chapter's genetic archives. Normal work that should have felt like relief after the nightmare of Vantor Prime. Instead, it felt like going through motions, performing a role that no longer meant what it once had. I kept thinking about the bodies I'd left behind. Not in the abstract, specifically, individually. Brother Felix, whose neck progenoid I'd abandoned when the Hormagaunts attacked. Brother Cornelius, with the maggots in his helmet. The unnamed brother I'd stood over in those final moments before extraction. 1,397 brothers, each one a person with history and personality and choices that had led them to Vantor Prime. All reduced to a number in a casualty report. The official after-action assessment praised the recovery operation's success. 603 gene seeds represented a 94% recovery rate against viable targets, well above doctrinal expectations for hostile environment extractions. The apothecaries who'd conducted the harvest received commendations for duty performance under extreme circumstances. Chapter Master Calgar himself reviewed the operation and declared it a model for future recovery protocols. Nobody mentioned what it felt like to saw through a friend's rotting corpse. Nobody talked about the smell, or the maggots, or the sound the reductor made when it drilled through flesh that had lost structural integrity. Nobody acknowledged that we'd spent 3 days committing systematic desecration while calling it duty. I started having nightmares. Space Marines aren't supposed to have nightmares. Our conditioning and psychological augmentation typically prevents trauma responses. But my subconscious apparently didn't care about doctrine. I'd wake up in my quarters tasting rot, feeling phantom insects crawling on my skin, hearing the wet sound of the reductor punching through decomposed tissue. The chapter's psychiatric counselors assured me this was temporary, a normal stress response that would fade with time and continued service. They were wrong, but I didn't tell them that. I learned to hide the symptoms, to function despite the weight pressing on my mind, to perform my duties with the mechanical efficiency that everyone expected. 4 months after Vantor Prime, the apothecarian received notification that the first batch of cultivated gene seed was ready for implantation. 47 progenoids had matured successfully, their genetic material deemed stable and suitable for creating new ultramarines. The remaining 556 would take years to cultivate fully, the gene savants carefully nurturing each one through the complex biological processes that would make them viable for implantation. I attended the implantation ceremony, watched as they took the gene seed I'd harvested from Brother Sergeant Marius's rotting corpse and implanted it into a 16-year-old aspirant from Macraga's southern continent. The boy's name was Lucius. He'd been selected from a population of 20,000 candidates, tested and screened and deemed worthy of transformation. The gene seed took root successfully. In 5 years, Lucius would become a battle brother, carrying Marius's genetic legacy forward into the next generation. This is what we fought for, I told myself. This is why the harvest was necessary. This is meaning extracted from horror. I wanted to believe it. Part of me did believe it. But another part, the part that had spent 3 days cutting into corpses, that had left 1,300 brothers to rot because time ran out, that still woke up tasting decay. That part understood with terrible clarity that we'd committed atrocities and called them duty, violated the dead and called it honor, traumatized ourselves and called it service. And we'd do it again, would be ordered to do it again. would comply with those orders because refusing would mean failing the chapter, and the chapter was everything, and individual suffering was irrelevant measured against institutional survival. 7 years have passed since Vantor Prime. I've conducted 3 more battlefield extractions in that time, harvesting gene seed from brothers who died on worlds unforbidden to name. The work hasn't gotten easier. The nightmares haven't stopped. But I've learned to function despite them, to narrow my consciousness to the immediate task and ignore everything else. Of the 603 gene seeds we recovered from Vantor Prime, 492 have successfully cultivated and been implanted into new aspirants. 111 failed during cultivation. Genetic degradation, contamination, or simple biological incompatibility between progenoid and host. Those losses hurt worse than the 1,300 we left behind because we'd succeeded in recovering them only to have them fail anyway. All that effort, all that trauma, and 18% of the harvest was wasted. But 490, 2 new Ultramarines will carry forward the genetic legacies of brothers who died on Vantor Prime. That has to mean something. That has to justify what we did. The alternative, accepting that we traumatized ourselves and desecrated the dead for a partial success rate, is unthinkable. I train the new apothecary aspirants now, passing on the knowledge Castor gave me. I teach them the 17 steps of proper gene seed extraction, the tolerances for tissue degradation, the protocols for hostile environment recovery. I tell them their duty is sacred, that preserving the chapter's genetic future transcends all other considerations, that an apothecary's role is both burden and honor. I don't tell them about the smell, or the maggots, or the sound of cutting through a friend's rotting corpse, or the nightmares that never stop. They'll learn those lessons themselves when they're deployed to their first battlefield extraction. When they're handed a narthecium and pointed at a field of cooling bodies and told to harvest 600 gene seeds from 2,000 dead brothers. They'll learn, and they'll break a little, and they'll keep functioning, because that's what the chapter requires. And the cycle will continue, generation after generation, apothecaries harvesting gene seed from fallen brothers who will be reborn as new warriors who will die and be harvested in their turn. An eternal spiral of death and resurrection that sustains the Ultramarines across 10,000 years of constant warfare. This is what service means. This is what duty costs. This is the price of the Imperium's survival. Not just the deaths of heroes, but the systematic traumatization of those who must reduce heroes to harvestable resources. Sometimes I think about my mother, try to remember her face before the memory fades completely. Would she be proud of what I've become? Would she understand that the angel of the emperor she told stories about is also a butcher of corpses, a grave robber with medical training, a traumatized instrument of institutional pragmatism? I don't know. The memory of her face is almost gone now, eroded by decades of conditioning and augmentation. Soon it will fade entirely, and I'll have lost the last connection to the person I was before the chapter remade me into what I am. But the gene seeds remain. 490, 2 new brothers carrying forward legacies salvaged from rot and horror. That has to be enough. That has to justify everything. It has to. Now you understand what lies beneath an apothecary's white armor. If you dare witness more truths, subscribe. The Emperor protects, or so they say. I am Brother Apothecary Hadrius Venn, servant of the Ultramarines chapter, guardian of the genetic legacy of Roboot Gilliman. I have harvested gene seed from 2,347 fallen brothers across 23 battlefield extractions. I will harvest more. The work never stops. The dead keep accumulating. And somewhere in the Imperium's endless wars, another apothecary is stepping off a Thunderhawk's assault ramp, smelling that first wave of decay, preparing to cut into corpses and call it duty. This is what the Imperium costs. This is what service demands. This is forever. Remember their names. Remember their sacrifice. Remember that before they were gene seeds to be harvested, they were brothers who believed their deaths would matter. They were wrong, but we harvest them anyway. This is duty. This is damnation. This is the Imperium.